About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
And this is Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness studies, cybernetics, and anthropology, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research and explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Now, in the world of medicine and psychology, consciousness is defined as being awake and aware, knowing what's going on around us. In the field of noetics, though, consciousness is much more. It's the processes and products of mind, both in our awareness and outside of it. It's profound human experiences that shape our lives. And ultimately, consciousness is what connects us all. Now, so far in this series, we've looked at a number of models of what consciousness is. We started with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, their ideas from the early 20th century explaining how much of what goes on in the mind is not in our normal awareness. It is, in fact, unconscious. And then Charles Tart's 1960s descriptions of the various states of consciousness, and Julian Jaynes relating consciousness to the separation of right and left hemispheres in our brain. We looked at some of the field models of mind that have been developed, trying to explain how it is that mind affects and is affected by the body and other things around us faster than nerve signals can travel, which brought up how quantum mechanics relates to consciousness, as described in the work of David Bohm, Dana Zohar, and Amit Goswami. We also looked at the global brain, or noosphere, as described by Peter Russell, Teilhard de Chardin, and Ervin Laszlo. Then the field of transpersonal psychology, which applies some of these understandings in therapy and research. Then we looked at the work of Bruce Lipton and Candace Pert, who described how hormones act as molecules of emotion and lead to a biology based on our belief systems. And then what is increasingly called coherence, that state of consciousness in which the heart, the emotions, and the mind are all in alignment. We've explored some of the experimental results supporting these new ideas about consciousness, including telepathic communication between two people, experiments involving mind over matter, and the experience of what is called clairvoyance or remote viewing. And we've talked about the different states of consciousness we operate in every day. Recently, we focused on frequencies and how we can move into higher and lower frequencies and states of consciousness using the work of Penny Pierce, Masaru Emoto, and others. You can catch up on those past shows on the KXCR.org archives. You want to click on the little cloud up on the banner at the top of the screen, and on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips, the books, and the authors that I mention on the show. Today, I want to talk about how states of consciousness affect the body, and particularly how they affected my body when I needed them to. While I've been interested in consciousness all my life and have been studying it and exploring altered states since I was a teenager, it wasn't until my 30s that I found a system of thought and method that was consistent in achieving specific physical and physiological results. I had been dealing with more and more intense symptoms for some months, and the doctors didn't have a diagnosis, much less a treatment plan. It was simply clear that if this pattern continued, I would not be alive much longer. As I say, I'd been studying consciousness for years, and I knew about many cases of what medical professionals call spontaneous remission. And I was familiar with some of the methods the patients had used to accomplish those. I began to apply them. One of them was visualization. Carl Simonton had been demonstrating for a decade or so at that point that patients who saw in their imaginations various parts of their body working together to rid them of disease healed much faster and often more fully than others. I had used visualization in my work for years as a tool to help people get clear about their lives and their future potentials. I now used it to see my own body being healthy and active. Healthy eating. From Adele Davis in the 50s to Laura Huckley and many more in the 70s and 80s, people have shown that what we eat and how we eat and when we eat has a profound impact on what the body can do and how we heal. And different ways of eating are appropriate at different times in our life, which most dietitians have not been trained to consider. I had been put on various diets over the years and felt the effects. Then I read these books again, and I began paying attention to what the body was asking for, moment by moment. It made a powerful difference. Earthing was another method I was aware of. Connecting with nature and natural processes has been part of getting well since ancient times. It's built into the shamanic traditions of indigenous cultures, but was made known to urban cultures in ancient Greece, when Hippocrates and Asclepius documented its effectiveness. Ralph Waldo Emerson explains how it works in his essay Nature in 1832. So I gave myself permission to spend hours in forests and by rivers and in gardens, including the several-acre Japanese garden not far from my home. It was powerful. Another part of my study was A Course in Miracles. I'd actually been one of the groups that were asked to look at it before it was published. The then relatively unknown 800 pages of text and workbook guides people from a mental framework based on material reality being all that is, to one that not only includes a spiritual awareness, but is focused on a greater self than the body and our normal minds. I went back into those books and found a new level of understanding and process. Then there's contemplation and meditation. These are techniques for experiencing a state of consciousness in which we're not driven by what's happening in and around the body, but what is happening in our mental processes. Contemplation of beautiful writing, an object, or music uplifts the mind into a state where what's going on around us is not so important, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. Meditation takes us to a deep inner state where we may not even be aware of or feel what is going on in the body or around us. Not able to do much else in those months, I spent hours a day in one or another of those states, at home and in nature. Then some friends introduced me to a new healing practice, new then, called Reiki. It was developed by a Japanese teacher named Usui. It was explained to me as the way that Jesus had healed, which really caught my attention, but in fact, it is based on Buddhist teachings. In any case, it is a powerful method of opening oneself to the flow of life energy through the body and allowing it to flow into others. Usui is documented as having restored thousands of people to health using this method in some pretty profoundly distressing conditions. And now, thousands of practitioners use it as a complementary healing method. I took the practitioner training and began applying the method to my own body and to others. Then I read and reread all the authors I knew who had described healing experiences, ranging from the Bible to various novels, and I found one book by Catherine Marshall, the author of Christie, called Something More, in which she describes being confined to her bed by an illness for 2 years, and then finally beginning to heal as she applied a particular biblical verse, quote, "Forgive aught against any." And so she began to write letters to all the people she felt anger or resentment toward, telling them that she had held things against them but would no longer, and asking them to forgive her for doing so. Some of those she was able to send, and the ones she could not send to the persons she put in the fireplace and let the smoke send them into the universe. And this thinking is very much in alignment with what the Course in Miracles teaches. So, based on all my studies across many therapeutic traditions, I developed a method that I shorthand as accept, release, replace, to rid myself of any long-term resentments or angers, and also to eliminate the triggers for such feelings. It was the combination of all these things, plus a strong will to be there for my children, that made it possible for me to live a healthy, full life once more. These various methods have been around for decades now and are available to all of us. What we do with them, how we apply them, is really up to us in the moment. Some of us have done the same things over and over for years and are getting good results. Some of us, as my case at that time, have done them intensely for a very short time and seen remarkable results. Some of us are teaching them and making them available to other people. All of these methods are ways to experience a deeper, greater health by establishing the state of consciousness in which health is normal for the body. We're going to talk more about that in another episode, but I want to plant the seed now that the state of consciousness we're in determines, to a large extent, where the body is functioning as a healthy, physiological process, or whether it is beginning to break down or is even subject to the issues floating around and trying to grab our attention and infect the body. Which brings me to a book. The book is written by a guy who now lives here on the Oregon coast. His name is Dean Schrock, and I get to meet him periodically here in various encounters. We speak at the same Unitarian church here in Florence. The book is called Why Love Heals: Mind, Body, Spirit, Medicine. Now, Dean has a PhD in psychology, and he was the director of mind-body medicine for a group of 40 cancer centers. On the cover of his book, it says his research found that cancer patients lived longer when they felt loved and cared for. This book explores why love heals and how to apply it in your life. It's got lots of great recommendations from well-known authors, Bernie Siegel, Larry Dossey, Neil Donald Walsh, and I'm sure that many, many more people would recommend it. The book's table of contents are like a catalog of complementary healing methods. Chapter 1 explains his interest in all of this, including an introduction to Carl Simonton's work, who I referred to earlier. His Chapter 2 is to help people get the will to live and begin to take control of your health and the research that supports that. He talks in Chapter 3 about loneliness, isolation, suffering, and the purpose of life. In Chapter 4, meditation, nature and weather, religion, quantum physics, entanglement, all those things that help us understand what he calls oneness. In Chapter 5, he talks about mind, emotions, and energy, the law of attraction as it's become popularized, the ideas that we've been talking about, morphogenetic and life fields, and epigenetics, which Bruce Lipton described as the biology of belief. He also talks about something that I've studied a bit myself, and it's a horrible word, but it's so meaningful: psychoneuroimmunology. In a few pages, he summarizes how it is that the state of consciousness affects the immune system of the body and how the body can be transformed by the state of consciousness we are in. He talks about empathy and forgiveness in Chapter 6. And in Chapter 7, love and healing and the science of altruistic love leading to transcendent experiences. Chapter 8 is a summary of the many methods of energy medicine, therapeutic touch, Norman Shealy's work, and David Eisenberg's results in China, as well as the state of pure consciousness that is what we can achieve in meditation. Chapter 9 introduces intuition, the role of dreams and prophecy and revelation in our inner work, and he draws on the work of Caroline Myss in this chapter. As a reference to the past, Aesculapius, who I mentioned earlier, counted on dreams to help us understand what's going on in the body as well as in the psyche and the world around us, and he used dreams often to help people heal whatever issues they were dealing with. In the back, he gives us some final thoughts and some answers to questions that he has heard and responded to in seminars over the years. He says a whole bunch of things about self-realization. In other chapters, for example, in the chapter on energy medicine, Dean says, indigenous people in ancient wisdom have seemingly always accepted intuition as a way to sense the energy or power of something and a way to understand the natural world. This usually was infused with their spiritual beliefs. And then it goes on to talk about Buddhism, Taoism, and traditional Chinese medicine, and then explains how it is that someone who might be doing alternative healing in this country might learn something from China. He talks about vibrational medicine, a marvelous book by Dr. Richard Gerber that I used in a book that I co-wrote called Calm Healing. In the energy medicine section, he says, the strangest thing that is reported from China, however, is when an elderly master of martial arts was able to resist the physical strength of several young men. In one instance, at least 8 of these young martial arts students attempted to physically push their master teacher at the same time and could not make him budge. This report is in Bill Moyer's movie, a documentary that he called Healing and the Mind. He also wrote a book on it. If you want more about that, I'll have links on our website, www.noeticmoments.org. So besides being a wonderful summary of Dean's experience and explanations for his experience, there are fabulous references and directions to other books and teachers that may be useful to you as you continue on this path of the Noetic sciences. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments on KXCR 90.7 on the FM dial. And that sound tells me we need to look at what's going on in the world today and what you, the listeners, are curious about. And what is going on in the world of science today is absolutely fascinating. All kinds of things are showing up as the Earth's temperature and water systems are changing, and the information coming from the new space technologies is opening up all kinds of possibilities in and around our solar system. But what we're here to talk about is consciousness. So today, I want to explore how new forms of computers are mimicking the way the mind works. Now, many of us who've paid attention to computers are aware that computers we work with are boxes of ones and zeros stored in patterns that become the files that become what we see and manipulate on the computer screens. That in itself is sort of mind-boggling, if you'll excuse the pun. But I mean, really, there's a set of electric currents that turn switches on or off to store all those videos and photographs and every word that we write or dictate into our computers. That's amazing. That's why we're talking in terms of gigabits. Okay, so there were bits, that's one on or off switch. There's a byte, which the original byte was 8 on or off switches. There are kilobytes, which are 1,000 bytes, so it's 8,000 switches. And then there are megabytes, which are 1,000,000. And now there are gigabytes, which is 1,000 megabytes. Amazing how many little on-off switches, and they are smaller and smaller with every new wave of technology we have going on in our computer devices, cell phones, even in our cars, and microwaves and stoves. Wow. But the human mind is always expanding, always exploring, always seeking something new, more, or other, which is itself a fabulous understanding of the nature of consciousness. So physicists and engineers continue to explore, and they're finding other ways to accomplish what we're already doing and go beyond it. Now, one of those ways is called quantum computing. It uses not electrical switches, but the state of a subatomic particle as the on-off or 1-0 bit of information. And that's really cool in itself. But it turns out that subatomic particles, as we kind of talked about when we're looking at the quantum mechanical models of mind, subatomic particles don't have clear shifts from on or off. In fact, they usually are hanging out in a space that's somewhere in between, or maybe even both. That's what Schrodinger's cat experiment, which never actually was done, is about. If you can't see whether it's alive or dead, it's kind of in both states at once. So quantum computing involves using that quality to imitate natural systems and processes that all have the same tendency to be neither on nor off, but somewhere in between, as, frankly, most of how our mind functions. Another thing about subatomic particles is that once they've interacted, they tend to remain tied together. Spooky action at a distance, or entanglement, so that if you change one, you change both, no matter how far apart they are. Again, designers are using that quality of subatomic particles to communicate between quantum computers so they can have multiple processors operating at the same time using this fuzzy state that is neither on nor off, but maybe both, to accomplish computations that have never been possible with the traditional on-off switch processors. Fascinating. And there's more. Today, which is the beginning of June 2022, I learned about yet another fascinating approach to computing. These guys are using sound and a metal plate to store and retrieve information. Now, we've talked about vibration in the field of cymatics before, where you vibrate a metal plate and whatever is sitting on it goes into a new pattern. But the folks at Cornell University are taking it a big step further. They are literally training a vibrating plate to, quote, read an image, using sound to store and transmit that image. So they take a picture of the image, they convert that image into a sound wave, they project that sound wave onto the plate. The plate then starts to reproduce the image that was transformed to a wave. Wow. The results are not always very exact, but they are coming closer and closer as they provide adjustments to the system so that the part that is transforming the image into the wave gets it closer and closer every time. Now, these implications for our future computers are intriguing, but I got to say, for further understanding of how our mind actually works, they are staggering. And of course, I will include the link on our site. Well, that has to be it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is, what it really does, and how we can experience our lives so differently when we use that understanding fully. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there's a list of the titles and other resources that we refer to on each show, along with the archived show, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I will do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio, 90.7 FM in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.